United with Christ. Meet local churches with open doors, serving throughout the Border Valley community and sharing the truth and hope of God's love and salvation. A presentation of Life Christian Broadcasting Television. And now, United with Christ.
Hello and welcome again. Here we are in El Paso, Texas. I'm Pastor Lorayn Melton, a pastor here on staff at Harvest Christian Center, and I'm joined by Pastor Jeena Lee. She's our children's ministries pastor here, and Pastor Daniel Everhart. He's our youth ministries pastor. And we're going to continue the discussion that we were having last week about our children and our teenagers and just cultural ideas and how they affect them and things that we think parents need to know. We just want to, give you some tools and just help you in any way that we can. So welcome to the KSCE viewing area. We're glad you're here with us today. And Jeena has brought another book with her today. We talked last week about technology. And so I just want to start with you, Jeena, and some things that you've found in this book that are helpful. We're going to be adding this book to our bookstore here at the church. Probably be a good resource for you parents raising kids right now.
Well, I found this book from one of the Instagram and website things that I recommended last week, Bark Technologies, which offers solutions for parents wanting to safeguard their children online, but also just offers a lot of good information for parents. And so I ordered this book, Parenting in a Tech World, and I haven't finished it yet, but everything I've read so far, it just assures me that this is a book that needs to get in the hands of everyone who is helping to raise children who are accessing social media, or parents are thinking about buying their teenagers or 13, 14-year-olds smartphones. It just helps you understand the dangers that are there, and also teaches you how to set good boundaries for your entire family. The co-author of this book, Mckee, he said that when he began writing this book, it's because he discovered his 9-year-old son had encountered adult content online through friends at school, and then also on their home devices. And
in other words, pornography.
Yeah, he just said, and he was appalled. He thought they had everything in place to protect their children. So he began to do the research to find out how to do this. And they, as a family, realized we are all addicted to our devices. We all have to have boundaries and guidelines. So it became an entire family conversation where they set really good goals for themselves, and they outlined what we need to do as a family, which I think is another thing we could add on to this conversation for families to realize. You can't set limits for your kids if you don't have limits for yourself as an adult.
It's so interesting, the times we live in, even just a few short years in the early 2000s when my kids were still young and at home with me, and the first time we got phones, they were flip phones. Probably 2004, I finally caved in and got them also some flip phones. But I remember even then realizing right away, okay, I've got to put boundaries, because they have no idea that they should not be on their phone texting somebody in the middle of the night. Like, I had to realize I have to take this phone away from them. And, I think parents have put in a lot of safeguards in our learning. Okay, we've got to take their phones away from them at night. And while we're here, though, we have a story. One of our teenagers, I think, who, and I'm not trying to tell on anybody. We're obviously not going to use any names, but I know this girl loves Jesus and she wants to do right, and her parents are really amazing, hands-on parents. They have other siblings in the house. But she's a teenager, and sometimes those teenage drives just drive you, and, she can search the house and find where they've hidden the tech and still access it and still do things and sneak out of the house. Oh, parents, we're praying for you, because you have to be ever, ever diligent with things like that. Were you going to say something else?
Well, I do think it's so important that parents, you have this mindset of your children are not basically trustworthy. They're children in a fallen world, and that's why God gave parents to children. They cannot raise themselves. Children under the age of 13, they cannot be trusted with a smartphone. And personally, I don't know that anyone under the age of 18 can be trusted with a smartphone unlimited, because they're so addictive, and they little kids, they have no way to shut off that addiction valve. They have no prefrontal cortex that is fully formed, and so they do not understand the consequences of their choices. So that's why we have to put these safeguards in place. And another resource that I found in doing some research is called a GAB phone. It's a GABB phone, and they look like smartphones, but all they do is talk and text, and they're never connected to the internet. And they're affordable, and then you can pay per month for the texting and talking. I just thought that is a great idea for children under the age of 15 or 16 to get used to being able to do those things, but not have unlimited access to the internet.
It's good. Daniel, what do you want to add right there?
Yeah, I think, I've seen some studies on this issue, and the same chemical responses that drug addicts get to drug addiction, teenagers have those same chemical responses to their activity on their phones, and so it's a very serious issue. It is an addiction that young people get to their screens, and there definitely needs to be these parameters set in place to keep them safe, to keep them protected, and really to just set some guidelines for them on their phones.
And I don't think it's a far stretch for we adults to understand what we're talking about here. I mean, we're connected. I'll say connected instead of addicted. We're connected to our phones pretty closely too. I think we do have more self-control and know when we need to put it down and do other things and be responsible. That's why, like Jeena said, our kids have parents, is because we've got to be there to help them do that. Along this line, recently on a Sunday morning, there was a family that came down to the altar. They had a couple of children with them, and I knelt down to pray with them because the other pastors were tied up. It turns out that the young man was 15 years old, and he was the one struggling. His parents said he's really struggling with anxiety. And immediately, I felt prompted by the Lord to ask him, what he's been watching. And he just began to spill. I think his parents may have even been shocked too, what he was doing and watching on his phone. So it is true, parents, that our children, they don't have, in fact, the science tells us that their prefrontal cortex is wide open. When babies are born, their prefrontal cortex is wide open. It stays wide open while they're growing, really until about 25 years old, I think. But especially as teenagers, it's wide open. Why? Because they've got to learn so much. Children and babies and teenagers are learning and soaking everything in. So everything that they're being influenced by, including what's on their phone, including, you and things in their life, is being soaked in to who they become. And as they age, that prefrontal cortex hardens and it closes. So when you think about it like that, when you think about a child's brain and everything they're soaking into, this is why things like introduction to drugs in teenage age is so dangerous, because it's affecting that brain that is growing and learning and everything. Jeena, I noticed you brought another book out here, which talks a lot about, Daniel, you mentioned this too, about the brain. And let's just jump from one hot topic, technology, to another one, which is this hooked up culture that we live in today. And what is that?
So this book is called Hooked, and it is by Joess McElhaney and Frida McKissick. And it is one of the most interesting books that I have ever read. Also one of, I think, probably the scariest as far as being concerned for our teenagers, because we are in such a sexualized culture that everywhere you look, kids are this is being thrown at them through advertisements, cartoons, etc. So one of the most profound things that I took away from this book, especially for parents of daughters, is to understand that when they engage in any touching activity, so if they're just simply hugging a boy, if they hug for longer than 20 seconds, the same hormone that a mother excretes to her newborn baby to bond them washes over a girl's brain, and after 20 seconds, she forms a trusting bond with the boy or whoever it is that she's hugging. So when they have sexual intercourse or anything leading up to sexual intercourse, she has bonded herself to this boy. And it is so dangerous because she trusts him, even if he's an abuser, even if he is not good to her. Those hormones are meant to be permanent between a husband and a wife. And so this book was very illuminating, and the dangers of even allowing your children to casually date or things like that. We have to be careful to equip them with the tools to set the safeguards in place so they aren't set up for failure.
It's so amazing what neuroscience is teaching us, like things like that we can actually see in the brain and what it does to us. Daniel, I'm sure you've seen a little bit of public displays of affection, and what can you add to that?
Yeah, so we actually, in the month of February this year, we did a series on dating, and one of the messages that we talked about was this idea of soul hooks, which is essentially what this book is talking about. And what it presented is when teenagers get intimate in any kind of way, they develop these soul hooks that are intended for married couples to experience. And then when that relationship ends, when they break up and they go their separate ways, essentially what a hook does is it tears out a piece of whatever it's got a hold of. And so when that relationship splits, that soul hook is separated, it's taking parts of who those students are along with that other person. And so if they're really sexually active and they're with several people, then they're just giving away parts of who they are all over the place. And I think, it's a scary thing. It's certainly something that we talked about that God can heal and God can redeem, but they're stripping away their identity and just willingly handing it over to people by creating these soul hooks. And it can even go beyond human interaction and in with their screens. If they watch pornography or if they look at an image online, they're creating this soul hook. And once that image or that video is gone, there's a piece of them that will never come back without God's redemption, and it's a piece of them that isn't reciprocated, whereas it is with another person. That's
incredible, and it makes me think too what you mentioned last week about the influencers, the social media influencers that are out there, and how they are living, a lot of them, these very public displays of affection life and basically naked lives. I mean, I see on Instagram, people that don't hardly have on any clothes, and our children can see that. I mean, it just comes up on your feed sometimes when you don't want it, but they're living, it's like this life with somebody, and it's created in this beautiful way. And then our teenagers who don't have the filters yet are seeing that and think that's what they need to aim for. So good when we can teach them the truth in practical ways and use the illustrations like that soul hook. That's a great illustration, I think, for a teenager to get a hold of. But parents, you are the number one influencer in your children's lives. I don't know if you know this, but we can't reiterate that enough. We only come alongside what you're doing and enhance what you're doing. You should be, if you're not already, but really you have the most time with your children while they're under 18. And you can't take it for granted. You think about it. They are a gift given to you by God. Even if they were an accident, they are a gift. God knows them. He formed them. He's created them in His image. And now it is your responsibility, and it is a great honor, really, to raise children into men and women who love the Lord and then can train the next generation. Jeena, I think you were about wanting to say something there.
Well, I was taking on what Daniel said. The importance of physical touch, parents to children, is so valuable. And especially fathers to their children, fathers to daughters. If you're wanting to train your daughter how to expect to be treated in a relationship in the future, dads can go such a long way. And if you are a single parent mom, that is not to say that what you put in is not invaluable. Talking to them about what Lorayn said. You are a gift from God. You are a treasure. Your virginity is a gift that you have to save for marriage. I love you. I see these things in you, and we want to safeguard those things until you do get married. And that goes right along with like all of the gender identity confusions that parents can reaffirm from birth who God created their children to be. Your role is so, so important. And I see that with the first to fifth grade. Well, birth to fifth grade is what I oversee. And then by the time they're in junior high, a lot of girls and boys, they're pulling up, don't hug me, don't. And I tell parents all the time, do it anyway. The way they're acting on the outside is not reflective of necessarily how they're feeling on the inside. So push through your kids pulling away from you. Hug them, kiss their cheeks, love on them. And you will do so much to invest in their future when you do that.
I used to embarrass my kids. And yeah, they get to a certain age where they don't want you to hug them and kiss them so much. But I would grab them when they were, in middle school and high school, and I would tell them, I love you. I love you. I want you to live for God. I want you to wait until you're married to have sex with anybody. I don't want you to get hooked on drugs. I mean, I would literally say those phrases while I was holding them tight. And they would be like, oh, Mom, we know. But I would do it anyway. So, you've got to be the parent. I think that's so true. We can't be intimidated by our teenagers. I want to go back to, maybe it was something you briefly mentioned a while ago, but it ties in right here really well. We love our kids. I hope we do. We love our kids, but we can't worship our kids. Like, they're not worthy of our worship. They still are humans with, sinful tendencies in their life, and they have to be taught and trained and led by us to Christ, like I said a couple of weeks ago. Did you want to say something?
Well, just along that, I do think parents, your ability to discipline your children, and when I say that, I mean discipline as training. Like Jesus had disciples, your children are your disciples, and you are training them up not only in the way they should go, but in how they live and how they interact with others. And it is difficult to deal with children that parents haven't taught any boundaries or to obey or respect authority. That makes our job very, very difficult. And by fifth grade, by 5 years old, their moral compass is already founded. So that early childhood years are so important in teaching them to obey, to say yes, ma'am, and no, ma'am, and yes, sir. And that is just a sign of respect, not a legalistic thing, but you're training them up so that they will listen to those who have influence in their lives in a godly and good way. And we appreciate that so much as children's and youth pastors.
Yeah, it's so true. I think I said this a couple of weeks ago in my message. 2-year-olds can't win, especially if they're throwing a fit or whatever. And you start disciplining, but then you get tired because, they have a strong will, so you just give in to them. Well, then they've just won, and they've just learned that if they hold out and throw a fit long enough that, they can win. And so you're training them that they can win. So that's when you train them the other way, that, no, you're stronger willed than they are, and not to lose your temper, but just like, nope. You're not getting your way if that's how you're going to act. And then you're training them, and you're training them in God's ways. That is so true. And then like a 13-year-old can't call the shot. They don't get to stay home in bed and sleep on Sunday because you don't want to deal with them and make them get out of bed. It's like, no, we're going to church. You're getting out of bed right now, and you're going to church with me. And that's just the way it needs to be.
and helping them to participate in the service when they're, like we have junior high ministry for 6th, 7th, and 8th grade on Sunday morning, but 9th and up come into the service with their parents. And it's so important for parents to engage those kids about what the service was. What did you hear Pastor say? What was the Bible text? Let's look at it. This is what I got. That is another part of sticky faith, like you talked about last week. Mm-hmm. Parents sharing their story with their kids is one of the best ways for children to then have a story about Jesus.
Yes, Sticky Faith, the Sticky Faith Guide for your family. This is a great resource, parents. I want to remind you of that. I want us to kind of switch now to this current, really huge cultural topic of identity. And we see postmodernism playing out with the transgenderism that has risen right to the surface, and we see it. It's loud. It is loudly in our culture. And it can be so vexing and so wearing. But I loved what you said last week, Daniel. You know, we are born for such a time as this. God chose to bring us into the world right now when we're here. And so he's with us, and he's given us everything we need to do the work that is before us to do. And, you know, my children are having babies right now. And as a grandparent, and Daniel's having children right now too. And it can be like scary to think about, what kind of world are my grandchildren going to grow up in? But the scripture gives me great comfort in that. And knowing that my children, and that Daniel and Nicole, are solid in their faith. And I trust that my children are going to do their jobs to raise their children in the ways of the Lord and to follow Jesus Christ. And it's your jobs as parents to do that. But here we are in this culture, and there are a lot of families and a lot of kids that don't have parents like this, and they are confused about identity. I want to recommend another book. I'm a reader, and so I recommend lots of books, but this book is also in our church bookstore. It's a practical guide to culture. It's helping the next generation navigate today's world. And, you know, one of the things it talks about in here is this identity crisis that we're facing today. I don't know yet if this has affected our ministries here at the church directly, but you know, how do you talk to the teenagers about identity?
Right. I think the place that I always go to and always start in this conversation is you need to understand that you are created in the image of God. And God created you with a plan and a purpose for your life, and he created you just the way that you are and just the way that he made you to be. And so, I really want teenagers to understand that you're created in the image of God. God created you, and it tells us in Genesis, after he created man, it was good. And so the way that God created you, he was intentional. He had a purpose. It was no mistake. And understand that you are made in the image of God, the way that he intended you to be.
You want to add something?
Well, I can think of two situations where I specifically addressed this with a couple of girls. And then when I pastored 5th and 6th grade for a while, we dealt with this quite a lot. I had a girl in 5th grade who already began to feel like she was a lesbian. Her background was a very, very difficult background. And so in my teachings, I would say exactly what Daniel has said. And then I would say, there are things that happen in your life that may make you feel like you are attracted this way, or you feel like you like this or like that, but our feelings lie to us. But God's word is what tells us the truth, and he made us boys and girls, and he made our body parts to fit together in a marriage covenant. And when I had a 9-year-old little girl come into my office and say, somebody called me a lesbian, does that mean I'm a lesbian? And I took her to the book of Genesis, right to the beginning, had her read, in the beginning, God created male and female, and he saw that it was good. No, you are not a lesbian. If you decide to get married, God has a man out there for you when you grow up. I think it's so important that parents stand firm and they don't cater to those feelings that their kids have, and so they speak truth over their lives and love.
That's right. We're sitting here, and it sounds like, oh yeah, of course, those are the answers. We are immersed in the truth, which are the scriptures that our God in heaven has given to us. So we're immersed in the scripture. That is the truth. We have families. We're raising them in the ways of the Lord. But we deal with broken people, and we have a culture that is not built on the truth anymore. It's a postmodern culture, so, they're skeptical of everything that is, true, or an institute like the home or the family. The culture is skeptical of that. And we have broken families then that come into the church, and families that come, abusive situations, neglect. Neglect is one of the biggest, I think, culprits in damaging children's lives, because then if they're neglected, it does, one of the questions here is, why do kids struggle with identity? And I think that's one of the reasons, is because they've been neglected. The parents haven't really looked at them and seen them and acknowledged them and enjoyed being with them, and loving them. And so here we are, kids are struggling with their identity. But what are some other reasons that you think we're in that place where children are struggling with their identity? Anything?
Well, one of the statistics I read, and I cannot remember which of those sites I talked about last week, but it said that previous to these last few years, the majority of people who became transgender were boys. It was not primarily a girl or a female problem. But now, and they attribute it directly to social media. The lies that are on social media directly impact the number of girls who are saying, I'm not a girl anymore, I'm going to be a boy. And I don't think parents can overprotect their children when it comes to social media, because the lies that are out there affect all of their identity. The social harm that come through, specifically the app TikTok, it is so damaging to girls and their feelings of how they look, how they present themselves. I'm too fat, I need to wear these clothes. It's so, I feel so desperate for parents and for our kids to understand those things are lies. The truth comes from your family unit, and for parents to affirm their children and to encourage them. Don't give up. Don't give up and feel like we're going to drown. Dig in and get in there with your kids and speak the truth over their lives, and you'll see a difference.
Daniel, you want to add anything there?
Yeah, I think, kind of going off of what Jeena said, with Instagram right now, the big thing is, and I don't know what safeguards you can really put on Instagram other than don't have an Instagram. But the big thing right now coming from this is really pressure from all kinds of areas. Right now, people are putting their pronouns that they go by in their Instagram bios. They're, essentially, if you don't accept my lifestyle, you're hated. And so, there's this pressure that teenagers are experiencing to cave into that, not only cave into it, but accept it as truth for themselves. And so going back to kind of how we started the conversation today, that's why it's so important to put safeguards around social media so that your children are protected from those postmodern ideals.
I'm curious for both of you. Do you talk about social media in youth or with your children about how to handle it? I mean, does that come up in your messages or lessons ever?
Yeah, all the time. Like I said last week, it's such a big deal right now. It's what they identify themselves as is through their social media. And so I think as pastors, if we don't have those conversations, if we don't integrate it into our messages, I think we're doing a disservice to our students.
Do they know that you're following them on Instagram, and does that cause them to pause about what they post?
Maybe for some of them. I think for some of them, they really don't care who sees it. They're just going to go with it.
They just post any. It's almost like they don't have an understanding of the consequences of what they're posting.
Right.
That's amazing. Well, real quickly, we have just a minute here left. I want us to talk about how we can ground our students in the story of the Bible. What are practical ways? I think one practical way is make sure your children are in church all the time, but that's not the only way. Like I say, we're barely with your kids. But what are some other practical ways, real quick?
Well, our current curriculum that we're using, and it will be an ongoing set, is called the Big God Story. So every week we talk about this is where we are in the Big God Story, and this is your place in the Big God Story, tying it to their everyday life. And we've seen a large increase in their ability to have a worship response to that, and how they're being able to put on paper concrete ways that they feel connected to God, or He's answering their prayers and things like that.
That's wonderful.
Yeah, and I think, help your kids understand the stories of Scripture, but also help them understand that this isn't just a story, that this really happened. These were real people that experienced real emotions and feelings just like you and I.
Amen. That is so good. We're out of time. This is just a little bit to help you get some resources. Remember, Focus on the Family is full of resources to help you parents. God bless you.